This is BBC One. Now we'll look at the political week in the South East with Julia George.
Hello and welcome to Politics South East. In the next half hour, would you like to see more of these put up in the South East? Permission to build wind farms could get easier if a group of MPs have their way. Also on the programme, as the weather gets colder and bills get ever higher, we'll ask what can be done to support people who are really struggling.
It is quite hard. With the bills and everything, you find it hard to actually manage to buy food, buy necessities really.
And local radio could be rather less local soon. So why is the BBC planning on sharing more programmes across radio stations in Kent, Sussex, Surrey and London?
It is about making sure that the portfolio of local services that we deliver across television, radio and online keep pace with the way audiences are changing.
I'm Julia George, and joining me are the Conservative MP for South Thanet, Craig Mackinlay, and also from Thanet, Karen Constantine, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Group on Kent County Council. We're also joined for the start of the show by Dr Mark Hudson, who's a Research Fellow in Energy Policy at the University of Sussex. So, let's take a look at this blast from the past, shall we? We're looking at a slightly younger Ed Miliband. This is back in 2009. Here he is opening the Little Chain Court wind farm near Romney Marsh. Now, it didn't exactly herald a new dawn for onshore wind. In fact, this was the last major wind farm to be built in the southeast. New sites has effectively been banned since 2015. But could things be about to change? A group of 30 or so MPs, including Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, are trying to force the government to relax the rules. Let's get our politicians to set out their stall on onshore wind, because we'll perhaps get on to offshore wind as well. Would you like to see more onshore wind farms in the southeast? Karen first.
Yes, I would. They currently account for about 11% of our total energy input. I think we could do more. I think they're simple and cheap to build. I think if we sort of deal with the planning regulation issues, we can have more that's going to be better for prices, better for energy security.
We'll come on to this whole issue of consent, about who gets to have their say. But again, the first simple question to you, would you like to see more onshore wind turbines?
No, because they don't work very well. I kept a very close eye on the amount of wind power being generated this week. On Monday morning, it was 0.84% of our electricity use. On Tuesday, it was 2%. On Wednesday, it was 5%. Thursday, it was 6%. This morning, it reached the heady heights of 14%. So
not a very windy week, maybe.
No, but you've got to, if you're going to rely on wind power, you need to have capacity to deal with the windless time and to reap the rewards when it is windy.
To be fair, one should look across a longer period of time than a few days. So for
store it. If you're relying on this, you've got to store it.
I promise we'll come on to this. Yeah. But just to be, to be a little bit fairer in terms of the period of time, the Office for National Statistics says 2020, 24% of UK electricity was produced by wind turbines. The following year, it dropped to 2 or 3%, down to 21%. But that's nearly a quarter in 2020. Should we bring Mark in? Mark Hudson, let's talk about this issue of reliability. Craig will tell us the wind is too intermittent to be reliable. What would you say?
I'd say that no one's advocating a 100% wind energy UK. And if someone puts forward that, they're creating a straw man argument. They're hoping to box you into a corner. Traditionally, the energy mix and the electricity mix, the two are distinct, has shifted over time. When Ed Miliband cut that ribbon, the UK was still extremely reliant on coal, and policymakers expected that that would continue to be the case. But the technology has improved and changed rapidly. And I think if you told Ed Miliband in 2009 that in 2020 it was, I think you said 24%, he'd have been amazed. And who knows what changes lie ahead as the technology improves.
Well, let's talk about storage, because I know Craig wants to come on to that. But Mark, if I could ask you on storage, what are the issues here? Because if the wind isn't blowing consistently all the time, and clearly it isn't, because it's, to do with weather and climate, what can we do about that in terms of storing the energy that is produced when it is pretty windy?
And also, when the sun's not shining, solar panels are useless. These are very familiar arguments that are put forward by people who oppose the energy transition towards renewables, and they're not quite the knockout blow that those people think. So I'd ask your viewers to think, are they able to get water out of their tap when it's not raining outside? And the answer is yes, because we can store water. And it's much harder to store energy and electricity, I'm not denying that, but it's not beyond our capacity. We are pretty intelligent species. So one of the arguments that gets used quite a lot is, we don't have enough lithium in the world, and lithium's very expensive and there are human rights issues. And what I'd say to that is that lithium is not the bottleneck, the blockage that some people would like you to believe. There are other ways of storing energy, and there's a report out by the Energy Systems Catapult pointing out all of the different companies who are working on creating energy storage, not just for households or for companies, but up to and including the grid level. So this is possible. Anyone who tells you it's impossible is probably trying to sell you something else as well.
What are you trying to sell me, Craig?
I want reliable energy at an internationally reasonable price. And it's all very well people saying wind is cheap. It might be, but the contracts are completely flawed. They get paid when the wind blows. When it doesn't blow, someone else's problem. The contracts that should have been signed with these wind power companies should have been, yes, we're happy to pay you whatever, £80 a megawatt hour or whatever it is, but you've got to provide 24/7, 365, because at the moment it's someone else's problem when the wind doesn't blow.
To be clear, it is not £80 per megawatt hour. Carbon Brief, the climate change website, have a table of comparing all the renewables, and by 2026, the megawatt hour the government's just bought through the latest auctions, £37, way cheaper than any other renewable and certainly cheaper than gas.
Well, the figures that I've seen is that...
Where have you seen yours?
It was actually an analysis of the accounts of the wind farm companies, and it is costing them £80 a megawatt hour, and then it's someone else's problem when the wind doesn't blow. I want a breakthrough technology. If we have a breakthrough in batteries or breakthrough in anything, well, that's great. It's not here today, and those figures that I quoted about very poor wind levels this week, it means you've got to have more gas. You've got most of Europe is now digging up coal again to try and do coal power, and all the while China is building a new coal power station every month and going completely gangbusters for coal.
Karen,
this is the issue.
Karen, at the beginning you said it was cheap. What's your argument on price?
Right, we need a mixed economy, don't we? We need mixed provision of energy. So we need onshore, we need offshore, we need renewables, we need to move very quickly because we've got a climate emergency. And I know that Craig is going to disagree with that, but we've also got a cost emergency because we're expecting 45 million people to be in fuel poverty. So we have to do something about them as well, and also just bringing it closer to home, bringing it back to South Thanet. We've got 61% of homes in South Thanet that lack proper insulation. So for every £4 somebody spends on heating their house, £1 is lost. So we need a government that after 12 years, frankly, can do better on renewables and can solve the problem of energy security, but can also put residents first so that they're not living in the cold.
Quickly, Craig.
Well, we've had an energy crisis for 25 years, and it dates back to the 1997 Labour manifesto, Tony Blair's manifesto, that said we see no economic future for new nuclear. And I'm also reminded by Nick Clegg in 2010 saying there's no point having new nuclear because it'll take 11 years to build. That would have been pretty helpful just now, wouldn't it?
Cold comfort for those sitting shivering
indoors. I know, well, that's why we've got a very big
12
energy
years
price guarantee
and 12 years to fix
through
it.
this
Both of you,
period.
we are going to come on to the challenges and the cost of living in Thanet, and I promise we'll spend some time on it. But if we may go back to Mark, I want to talk about consent and planning in a moment. But back to Mark for a moment on the cost issue. We've heard strong arguments from both of the politicians here on the cost of wind. What would you tell our viewers?
Can I answer that in two parts? And unlike politicians, I'll answer your question first, which is that new technologies, if they succeed, and I think we can agree that both onshore and offshore wind are succeeding, traditionally they come down in price quite quickly, quite radically, and faster often than is predicted. And that's the pattern that we're seeing with offshore wind, which used to be impossibly expensive and is now cheaper. And you've quoted the Carbon Brief figures as well. So if you take an historical point of view, which as an academic I'm expected to do, what we're seeing is not a surprise that the price is dropping very quickly. My second answer is, dates get thrown around like 2010 or 1997. The date that really matters is September 1988, when Margaret Thatcher, who is perhaps more of a hero to Craig than myself, said that we have a big problem with climate change. And we've been failing to do anything significant since 1988, and it's time that we started.
Mark, thank you. Politically, consent. This is the key issue now. Whether these new turbines can ever be built is going to come down to what local consent looks like. Karen, to you first of all. I think Labour wants local communities at the next general election to have a say.
Yes,
what
of course.
sort of say?
Yes. I think a say on what sort of society they live in more broadly, not just to do with energy.
But on this issue.
No, but look at the windfall tax, which the Tories have introduced, and there's a £17 billion loophole in there for the energy companies, which could insulate 6 million homes. That's what we're going to. That's what we're going to be. That's what we're going to. That's what we're going to put to people.
I really want to stick with this.
And people will have a choice. People will have a choice.
How will you ask people? Because at the moment, one person saying, "I do not want a wind turbine in my community," can block it, which is why they haven't been any. What does consent look like for you on this issue?
Well, I think people have to be willing to consent, or they don't want to consent. The same with fracking. I don't know what that figure would be.
Craig, just briefly on consent.
Right. Okay. We had a debate in Parliament recently about fracking. As you know, I'm very much in favour of fracking.
Very dangerous, Craig, fracking.
What is the point in spending oodles of trillions, of billions, in Qatar, the US, Trinidad, Tobago, and even Australia, bringing it in on an LNG ship, the CO2 cost of that, when we could be doing it at home? And
but you're swerving the question.
No, I'm not swerving the question.
I want to know about consent for wind turbines. What does it look like for a Tory?
Parliament talked about consent for fracking. If there is consent for fracking, great, let's do it. If there's consent for wind farms, great, let's do it. It should be locally based and driven.
Thank you.
Nobody is going to consent to fracking.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us. I promised we'd talk about the cost of living in Thanet, so we'll move on to that if I may. Have you turned the heating on yet? The southeast is set for sub-zero temperatures overnight later this week, so let's talk about the cost of living and how it's affecting people in the southeast deprived areas. Places like Thanet, where even before the crisis, a third of children were living in poverty. Here's Marcella Whittingdale.
Anyone on a low income can shop here at Margate's independent community supermarket, where the price of food is heavily discounted. For those who can't afford it, there's also a special voucher system to help them use the store for free. You have to sign up to shop here. So far, there are more than 4,000 members, with 200 people joining up in the past fortnight.
It's worse now than it ever has been, and it's getting worse. You can talk to all the food banks, all the agencies in Thanet, and they'll tell you the same. There's more and more people coming through the door.
Katrina shops here every week. Her one-bed flat's been without heating for 6 weeks because of a broken boiler, so it's more important than ever she eats properly.
I'm in a small flat and we're going through like £40–50 worth of electric a week. It's just a joke. I think it's doubled. Doubled in the price within about 6 months. Yeah, it's quite hard. With the bills and everything, you find it hard to actually manage to buy food, buy necessities, really.
It's been a really busy day here, with volunteers working pretty much non-stop. And just up the road, our food club Margate and the Salvation Army are also offering help. In addition, there are 4 food banks within a 15-minute walk of where I'm standing. In fact, a quick search of the internet will show you there are now at least 14 places in Thanet where people can go to get help with getting enough to eat. The government say they're protecting millions of people in need with direct payments and money off energy bills, while there's more than £13 million worth in grants available for those eligible across Kent and Medway. But Katrina says the government just don't understand how people are struggling.
They need to come down here, spend a time in our shoes for a couple of months and see how bad it is.
And many more people here in Margate feel the same, and that while times are already tough, the future's looking even more bleak.
That was Marcella Whittingdale with our report. Katrina, who we heard in the film there, Craig, she says politicians don't really understand lives like hers. Is she right?
I don't think that is right, because I run a surgery most weeks in the constituency, so I see the full spectrum of people's problems come through the door, and I know that it is tough out there at the moment. That's why we've got the energy price guarantee to try and keep the energy prices down a bit. But any government can only sell 10pences for 5p for so long, because all has to be paid for. We've increased benefits in the autumn statement by 10.1%. The triple lock has been maintained, 10.1%. So, those who are really struggling, I think are getting the support and at a reasonable level. And there's also the voucher system that's come out for your energy bills as well. And if you're on universal credit, you've had 2 lumps of 324 just recently, and there's extra support in winter fuel allowance. So put all that together, and there's a fair bit of support out there.
There is, but it's not quite the question. Let me try it with Karen. You did answer it at the beginning, but do you understand Katrina's life?
Yes, I understand it completely. I understand it because I've lived it, but I also understand it because I'm very close to the residents in Ramsgate, in my division, and we've been struggling with a rising tide of poverty, and child poverty in particular, for many years now. And all that has happened whilst you've been the MP there is that figure year on year has gone up. So we've gone from 27% to 33% in some of our wards. In some of our wards, child poverty stands at 51%. Unchecked,
and so
what people are struggling with.
If I just go on, finish the point.
Well, just to say about the rise in benefits, which is very welcome, but in real terms, wages are being cut, benefits are being cut, and we expect, Joseph Rowntree Foundation expect that by next year, an average family unworking on benefits will be £44 a week less well off.
Are you not asking yourself why they're not working when we've got 1.3 million jobs available?
How about I ask the questions in a minute, and I will get on to that, Craig. Let me ask you, because you jumped in there with a question about poverty. Do you think there is poverty in Thanet or not?
Of course there's poverty, but is there destitution? Very different things. Poverty.
What, are you okay with poverty?
No, poverty has got this register of 60% of median income.
Yeah, below 60%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, on that basis, if the UK was hit by a meteorite and the economic activity ceased, we would have no poverty, because we'd all have nothing.
We have been hit.
So
we have been hit by meteorites.
It's too rough and ready a figure, because if you had a family on 60% of the family next door, and they were leading, a lifestyle that is cooking for themselves, not having the latest gadgets and all of this, they could have a reasonable lifestyle.
But you've also, Craig, in the past, you've complained about the way...
about working. I really do.
And I promise we'll come on to that. In the past, you've complained about the way child poverty, in particular, has been portrayed in the media.
Yes.
What's your argument?
Well, because every year, when the figures come out, in local newspapers, there is a picture of a raggedy child with no shoes on some old steps. Now, I'm afraid that is misrepresenting the situation. There are people who are having a tough time. We have food banks. We have wonderful campaigners like Sharon Goodyear locally in the Thanet Kitchen. I know she has, but I've worked with her for many years, trying to get people cooking healthily, cooking for themselves, managing their budgets. I've even offered, now this is really significant, please, Sharon, let me see some of these families. I'm a chartered accountant. Let us have a good look at their family budget. Make sure they're getting all the benefits they have. Answer, there is none.
Are they wasting their money? Is that the subtext to your argument here?
What's that?
That you want to look at their accounts?
I want to see, are they getting all the benefits they're entitled to? Are they managing what they have in the best way they possibly can? My answer isn't just to give more benefits. My answer is, please, let's get your life in order. Let's get to work, because that's what universal credit is all about. You'll always be better off working.
Well, I mean,
on the unemployment issue, nearly 9% of young people in Thanet are unemployed.
Yes.
How is that possible when there are businesses crying out for workers?
I don't know. I don't know why we can't get our young people into jobs. I don't know whether they lack the right skills. We do know we've also got a crisis in education. People are not necessarily coming out of education able to read and write and with the right sort of soft skills. So we are going very badly wrong in some ways.
In Thanet or everywhere?
I mean, think about the poverty now. So you've got families that are moved from house to house. You've got families that can't eat more than one room, if they can eat one room. So you've not got kids studying for homework, etc. So we've got a maelstrom of problems that are going on. Since Craig has been the MP for South Thanet, the poverty rates have gone up from 35%. It's his government's fault, and it is his fault if he doesn't do
We've got
more
1.3
to
million
tackle it.
jobs
You had
available
your
in the
say, let
UK.
me have my say. It's not all based on jobs, because there are many people who are in work who are also having to claim benefits because the jobs don't. And I looked at jobs in Thanet last night, and there is a wealth of low-paid jobs available. There isn't much skilled work.
Okay, and I did promise you wanted to talk about employment in
I do.
Thanet.
We've got 1.3 million jobs available.
What about in South Thanet?
We have a number of jobs. I mean, I walk down the high streets probably as you do. How many shops do you see? Help wanted, help wanted. You open the...
Not many. I see them closing.
You open the local newspaper, you've got Thanet Earth advertising on a weekly basis looking for staff. Of course, it might be at the lower end, but we've increased the minimum wage. It's going up to £10.42 from next week, which is not a bad amount of money.
No.
I had an example the other day. Now, this is quite remarkable. Woman is working, great, absolutely fantastic. And she has 3 children. She gets £1,800 a month in universal credit, and she's earning about £1,500 a month in where she's working. That's £3,300 free of tax. That is only a fraction less than I earn a month. And so that is the reality of universal credit. This woman is doing the right thing, and I think she's managing, quite well. 3 children, that's tough. Paying rent, £3,300.
I don't think you're listening to residents, because it is literally all that people are talking about on the streets. Food banks, clothes banks, bed banks, warm banks. Everybody is looking for some sort of help and some sort of support, because living costs have risen and risen and risen. We've had 12 weeks of absolute economic chaos. Let me finish my point. We've had 12 weeks of absolute economic chaos where our economy has tanked, literally tanked, and now the poorest people in our society are paying that price.
Right,
and you are sitting back denying their reality.
You're denying that there are jobs available and people could be getting themselves...
Thank you. Both of you. I've got one last topic, so we're going to draw a line under that one there. My apologies for insisting that we move on. Finally, this week, let's talk about local radio in the South East, which is set to become rather less local. The BBC has come forward with plans to share afternoon programmes across Kent, Sussex and Surrey. Now, that means if you're living in Medway, you could find yourself listening to a broadcast from Brighton. And if you're in Guildford, you might find yourself listening to someone like me, a radio presenter from Kent. Perhaps more dramatically, weekday evenings and every weekend morning, we will all be sharing radio shows with London too. Now, the BBC says the cuts are necessary so more money can be diverted to online content. Here's what BBC bosses told Parliament this week.
If you look at the average 65 to 75-year-old in England today, they rely on online more for news today than they do on radio. That is the level of shift we're seeing. It's not a market shift, it's an audience shift. And we have to make sure that we prioritise our money in a way that delivers maximum value to local audiences. And I know it's difficult, it's incredibly difficult for colleagues, but unless we get that rebalancing right, we will drift to the margins of our community lives.
That was Rodri Taufan-Davis. He's head of nations at the BBC. Now, we did invite him or other senior BBC managers to join us today, but they told us no one was available. Joining me is Vince Maple, leader of the Labour group on Medway Council. Now, Vince wrote a letter signed by more than 100 Labour council group leaders opposing the cuts. What are your concerns, Vince?
Well, look, Julia, across the country, people have been through a really challenging couple of years with the COVID crisis. One of the things which has made sure individuals can feel safe and confident was the trusted voice of BBC local radio. And what thanks to those hard-working women and men get who have delivered that service to our community, they get threats to their jobs. But actually, I'm concerned about the residents who want to have that trusted local voice in their household, day in and day out. Frankly, people do not want to see what's happened in commercial radio happening subsequently to our British Broadcasting Corporation local radio. That's what's at risk. So that's why in a matter of days, more than 100 leaders in local government stepped forward to sign that letter to Tim Davie, and we will continue to push hard to defend that much loved, much valued community service which is carried out by BBC local radio.
It's not disappearing entirely. That isn't in any way the threat. The BBC has replied to you, and the first thing they point out is that the schedule on BBC Radio Kent, on BBC Radio Sussex and Surrey is stays the same between 6 a.m. in the morning and 2 p.m. So the breakfast show and the mid-morning show. They say that's when most people listen. Does that reassure you?
Well, no, because we saw this over a kind of 5 to 10 year period in commercial radio. Broadcasters would merge one show regionally, then nationally, and then eventually commercial radio has no local content whatsoever. That's my risk that I think people are rightly concerned about. So actually we need to be saying now that what people need in their lives, and we know this, I know this when I speak to yourself and others on Radio Kent, people are listening to that, and actually they value that ability to share their experiences. They value that ability to hear what's happening really hyper locally, which simply cannot be carried out if you end up with effectively BBC regional radio rather than local radio. That's the risk, and again we will continue to push hard to say actually we've got to defend what we have.
The BBC will say to you, this isn't cuts, it's reprioritising. We want to reach more people in all of the local areas that we cover, and we feel that we are behind the times when it comes to digital online content. We want to spend more money on that. We've got to take the money from somewhere else. What do you say to that?
Well, look, the BBC online presence is good and strong, and that's with the existing resources. And I think it's about having a balanced offer to the listeners, to the viewers as we go forward. You know, Netflix are not going to be talking about your local community group. Amazon Prime are not going to be talking about your child's school if there's an emergency there. The BBC local radio has consistently delivered that, particularly during the pandemic. And that's why I think so many people across the country signed that letter as a matter of urgency to say, look, this is not a debate that can just happen in isolation. We need to make sure that we're saying loud and clear we've got to defend those services which we know are valued by listeners across the county here in Kent, across the South East and across England. So
for your money, this needs to be stopped altogether? The BBC yesterday, they were talking about this, the select committee saying we might make some minor changes about who shares with whom, but this is going to happen.
My concern is that actually this is not the first time they would do this if we move forward. As I say, in commercial radio, lots of individual broadcasters ended up being merged into one national local radio station. That's madness, and I want to make sure that we do all that we can to defend that valued, trusted BBC local radio.
We'll always find room to give you a voice, Vince Maple, but I think you need to save what's left of yours. Thank you so much for joining us. We've only got 50 seconds left of the programme, but a really quick thought from both of you. Craig, first of all, what you think should happen next? Well,
there is a pie to be cut. I think the BBC are looking at it in the wrong way. I think local radio is very important. When I look at what one of your competitors, Meridian Telly, did, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. It lost its local relevance. People stopped being interested in what's happened in the Isle of Wight if you live in Kent. Yeah, okay. And don't go up that same route, local radio.
What do you do? If it snows or if there's flooding and that, you know, you turn the local radio on to see if the schools are open.
They will crank us back up again. They'll put us back on air if that happens.
They think, well, that would be great, but you will have lost the listening figures by that point. But the thing is, those other companies, they can't get into radio. But the BBC has got radio, it's got local radio. Let's keep radio local.
Thank you both for joining us. Really nice to see you this week. That is it for this week. My thanks to Mark and to Vince as well for joining us. We're back next Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.